Well, good evening to all my faithful viewers and listeners over 2023 and 24. It has long been a tradition here in the UK that at Christmas time we have a frightening story, a ghost story, maybe Shelley's Frankenstein or Bram Stoker's Dracula, something to tingle the spine before the arrival of Santa Claus and his sleigh and happy things like reindeer and elves. Something frightening. And I'd therefore like to offer to everyone a frightening story, a shocking story for Christmas 2024. So turn off the television, turn down the lights, maybe light a candle and pour your favourite tipple and listen to the Royal Enfield horror story for Christmas 2024. Now, a while ago, a person, let's call him Richard, decided that he would like to buy a Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. And after many years and many motorcycles, he thought the best thing he could do was to buy a bike that had had no previous owners to do things to it. You know, the sort of thing that happens on a used bike. Pipes get cut, wires get diverted, things get painted gold all over the bike. The sort of thing that previous owners do. So Richard went to his local Royal Enfield dealer and he bought a brand new Royal Enfield Interceptor 650, and he duly took it home and used it for several months. But then he found that the battery was going flat, and he couldn't really explain this. The bike was going on long runs, wasn't just short hops to the shops and back, and yet the battery was going flat regularly. So despite the fact that the bike was under warranty, he paid out of his own pocket for a new battery, and he fitted that to the bike. And all seemed well for a week or so, and then the battery went flat. So he realised that this would have to be a warranty claim on a what was effectively a brand new motorcycle, and he took it back to the selling dealer and explained his problem, and he left it with them. Now, naturally enough, having got used to riding such a fantastic bike, riding through the local countryside, turning heads frequently, and just loving it, he missed the bike. And it took 2 weeks for the dealer to get back to him to say, well, we've solved the bike, we've solved the problem, it's all done, we've fitted a new battery, which that would make it the third that the bike had had in under 2,000 miles, and we've tidied up the wiring around the rectifier. So Richard was so pleased to get his bike back, he didn't really question any of that, and yeah, everything was fine. Everything was fine thereafter. In fact, the battery charged, he didn't have any problems with it flattening, he used his bike. And then he came across the channel of Ebenezer Slick. Now, Ebenezer Slick had a small YouTube channel catering to the GT and the Interceptors, and having watched the videos on this channel, Richard decided that he would relocate his rectifier regulator to the front of the bike, which was something that Ebenezer Slick had repeatedly mentioned and many people had done. And this is where the horror story began. Having bought the cable relocation kit, the daddy cooler, Richard then proceeded to remove his rectifier regulator to find, oh shock horror, that in tidying up the wiring, as the dealer had said, what they'd actually done was to snip off the 3-pin block terminal from the vehicle wiring harness. So that's the output from the alternator to the rectifier underneath the bike. They'd cut it off completely, and they had soldered on a 3-pin block terminal, non-standard, and fitted a non-standard rectifier regulator unit, which had only one red wire and one black wire. So the 4-pin connector, which would normally have connected to the rectifier regulator to carry the rectified current back to the wiring harness and therefore the battery, was not to be seen. So the bike had effectively been rendered non-standard by the selling dealer, who apparently, when quizzed about this, said he couldn't get hold of a rectifier, which are readily available in India from many dealers, vastly cheaper than retailers here in the UK try to flog them for. So Richard, having seen Ebenezer Slick's channel, contacted him and said, I have a non-standard wiring harness, my wires have been cut and soldered, I have a single red wire and a single black wire from my rectifier connected directly to the vehicle battery. Yes, now that's an important point, because on the Royal Enfields and the Interceptors and the GTs, the charging circuit is number 1 on the fuse board underneath the bike, the fuse box. So the rectified current from the rectifier regulator goes through fuse number 1, a fused wire, and that's important. But this Royal Enfield main dealer had in fact just connected the output from the rectifier directly to the battery terminals by 2 individual wires, not shrink tubed, not wrapped in insulating tape, just 2 wires going up the frame and connected to the vehicle battery, an unfused supply. So naturally Richard was very, very worried. He contacted the dealer, who was very evasive about this and quoted all sorts of other companies who'd done work on the bike for him, but none of it transpired to be true and it didn't really add up. So in desperation he contacted Ebenezer Slick. Now Ebenezer's first reaction was to say bar humbug, of course, because it's Christmas and we don't do that kind of thing. However, having been visited by the ghost of Royal Enfield present, past and future in one evening, which differs slightly from the Dickens tale, Ebenezer Slick realised the error of his ways, and he sent to Richard a correct 3-pin block, double the number of terminals needed for crimping onto it, just to cover for accidents and so on, you know. And Richard, upon further investigation under the bike, actually found the 4-pin connector block, the standard connector block, tucked out of the way under the bike. So thanks to the Christian generosity of Ebenezer Slick, Richard was able to crimp on to his wiring harness 3 yellow wires from the alternator output, the 3-pin block, and restore the status quo ante, one might say, of his bike. This then enabled Richard to either fit his rectifier regulator in the stock position under the bike where it gets hot and burns out, or to use his extension cables that he'd already bought from Ebenezer Slick and relocate the rectifier. And this he duly did by connecting the plug and play cables. And there it is, a happy ending to a Christmas horror story, that a bike can have its wiring harness butchered by a main dealer, but that the situation can be salvaged and the bike restored to its pre-butchering state. Now, I do know that there is a channel, somebody in Bulgaria, I think, a British bloke in Bulgaria was talking about relocating his rectifier, and snipping wires and doing it his way and so on. So here is what one might say, a warning to the curious at this time at Christmas. Do not butcher your wiring harness. Do not cut the cables. Do not snip block terminals off your stock wiring harness just to relocate one electrical component. This is something that only Baron Frankenstein would have done this time of year. Leave your wiring harness standard. Do not snip off terminals and have to solder 7 wires underneath the bike and 7 wires at the rectifier regulator end. Something that you would have to repeat if the rectifier ceased to function correctly. There will be more snipping and cutting and shrink tubing. So ignore those channels that suggest that you do that and go for the extension cables, which are reversible if necessary, far neater and far easier. So there you have it, faithful listeners, viewers, a horror story at Christmas, courtesy of Royal Enfield, but with a happy ending. And on that note, to quote Tiny Tim, I would say, well, God bless us everyone. And I'd like to wish anyone watching this video and my previous videos a happy Christmas, a great New Year, and a safe 2025. God bless us everyone.